Welcome to the Furlo Capital Real Estate Podcast, where we dive into the intricacies of passive real estate investing. And our mission is to equip people to invest wisely in both properties and residents so that we can build our wealth and improve housing together. I'm James, and this is my wife, Jessie.
Hi. Glad to be here.
Yeah. I'm excited for this one. I'm excited for all of them.
Yeah.
But I'm excited for this one because we're going to be talking about our very first purchase today.
Aww.
I know. And I know people like stories.
Been a while.
I know.
Man.
And so I just kind of want to talk about it. So for starters, what is the property? Do you remember?
Okay. Yeah. I got to think back. So it's a duplex, and I remember it was. How much do you want me to tell you?
You can tell me everything.
All right. Well, it was a duplex. I think each side was a 3-1.
Yep.
And they both had a garage.
Yep.
One of them had kind of like a pretty big garage, just like.
Yeah, it was a 2 and maybe 2.5 car garage.
2.5 car garage, and then the other one was like a 1.5
just
car
one.
garage. And it was next to a big old field, and so it was kind of nice. There weren't neighbors like right next door, so there was space behind, and then it was next to a mobile home park type of thing, kind of in front of it, on a fairly busy-ish road, but not super busy. And it had this weird like concrete wall in the front.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Because I think it was on the busy road, so it had like that concrete wall in the front, and then big picture windows in that front room, which were
Those were cool.
They were pretty cool and huge. Like our dog loved them. I remember.
Oh, I know.
Like he would just stare out the window, watch
people all day. Yep.
Oh yeah, bark at people walking by.
That's the downside of our current house. He doesn't have a view.
Yeah, there's no
of
windows.
people. It's sad.
So sad.
Poor guy.
It's quieter. Yeah, so that's the duplex.
Yeah. Do you remember how long it took us to find it?
Oh my word. I don't remember the time frame necessarily, but I remember walking through a lot of different properties.
Yeah. 18 months.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when we first started looking, I wanted to get an idea for the market, and Zillow was around.
Sure.
But this was we started in 2008. And so it was there, but it wasn't what it is today.
Okay.
And so I was like, I want to understand the market. I want to see 100 different properties. And
which
all
was
multifamilies.
super helpful.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I remember walking through, it leads us to our first property, but I remember walking through a ton of different types of properties that were like, ooh, this is really high end, super nice. Like, what would we take from this type of property and put into a fixer-upper? And vice versa, some properties we walked through where I was like, and we're leaving. Like, this is gross and terrible. And you were like, yes, this is the best. It's so much potential.
Yeah, and I think part of it, too, is we were just new. We like to analyze everything, and so it just took a time for us to find it. But this was one where it came onto the market, and if I remember correctly, they were asking $230,000 for this property.
Yep.
At the time, rents on it it was like $850 and $900.
All right, that's what I was gonna say. It's just under $1,000.
Yeah, each, and so the numbers just didn't quite math out,
which is nutty to think about comparing it to today's numbers. But
and so we found it in the middle of 2009. So we'd been kind of looking for a year-ish at that point. Sure. And I remember I saw it and went, this is just too high. I was like, at the end of the day, I was like, it's like $30,000 too much. Yeah. And so we ended up, we passed on it at that point, just to kind of stay on the market. And then 6 months later, they went and they lowered the price by $30,000. And so that was when we stepped in. And I didn't offer them $200,000 for them. I said, well, if they're in their head, they're willing to discount something by $30,000, I'm going to make an offer that's $30,000 less than their new thing. And so we made an offer at $170,000. Which they rejected and came back and said, no, it's got to be like $180,000. And so that was what we ended up buying it for, was $180,000. I think I've been telling people $185,000, and I looked it up and I went, oh, it's actually $180,000.
There you go.
So awesome. Which then falls kind of more in line with what the rent was for that place. And I remember we lived in one side and then we moved into the other. Now the way this worked,
living in it is debatable. Maybe we'll get into that. But
No, but that was the plan. Is we were going to live in one side, rent
was
out
the
the
plan.
other.
Yes.
Because we had to live in it for 3 years.
Right.
Because in 2009 there was a special program for first-time homeowners where you could get $10,000 like a refund on your taxes, but you had to live in it for 3 years.
Which was fine.
Yeah, and so
because we were going to fix it up.
well, it was longer than I wanted to.
Sure.
Because I was like, man, let's do like the 10, 11 months and move on.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say no to 10 grand. So
Sure.
so we stayed there, and I think it was good. Yeah, do you remember our very first night?
I remember that was like the place, because it was our first place. We started a tradition where we eat dinner there.
Yep.
Like the first night, there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
Like there was no beds, no anything, but we brought sleeping bags and blankets. We were going to sleep there and have dinner. And
Yeah.
we had mac and cheese.
Yep.
And I just remember we had dinner, and I started walking around the place and just being like, this is a dump. Like, we bought a dump. What did we do? Like, we spent over $100,000, almost $200,000 on a dump. Like, what is going on? And I remember just being in tears and being like, this is really bad. What happened? You were like, no, don't worry. Like, there's potential here, and we're going to rent it, and it's going to be fine. And like, I recovered, but that first night I was a little worried.
Yeah. And then I remember too, shortly after that, there were 2 tenants on the other side, and they gave us a 30-day notice. It was like, we went over to review the lease agreement. Like, hey, just want to make sure we're all on the same page. They're like, here, awesome. Here's our 30-day notice.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And that was the point. I mean, it was literally like, I think it was like the next day.
Yeah, it was
like,
very quickly.
Yeah, so we hadn't moved in yet to the other side.
Right.
And that was where I had the brilliant plan of, okay, what if we don't actually move into this side? We move into the garage and move just a couple things into the main house. We fix up this whole side, make it look nice. And then once they move out, we'll jump over to the other side and we'll live there for 3 years. Was my brilliant plan in October, walking into November. And it gets a little cold here in Oregon. And and there was, it wasn't quite as straightforward as you want, because there were these 2 single moms who were living together. One of them, she moved out like the next week, no big deal. The other one just kind of disappeared. We never saw anything. And I was like, now what? Couldn't get a hold of her. She wouldn't return any messages. And I just, not knowing any better, we ended up going through the eviction process. Because I was like, I guess this is what you do. And so that's what we did. And I remember I was super excited to go to court. I was like, I'd never been inside of a real courtroom before and then seen like a judge do its thing. I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I mean, horrible circumstance, but
sure.
Like super excited to try it out. And I remember I get there, there's a whole bunch of people. I'm super pumped. And I'm the very first person he calls up. I'm like, oh, okay. So it's, James versus this person. I'm like, yeah. And I stand up and he goes, is the other person here? And I went, nope. He goes, boom, done. You win. Take your paperwork, head on out and go there. And I was like,
you're like, wait,
I didn't see anything.
There's no
nothing,
court stuff.
Nothing happened. Part of me was like, can I hang out? I'm gonna watch. Yeah, it was a bummer. That's what it was. And later on, I did my civic duty. I got jury duty, and I got selected on a jury, and I got to see the whole thing, and it was awesome.
It's awesome.
And if you ever get a chance to do jury duty, like I highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's super
strangely
fun.
enough, I've never even been summoned.
I feel like that's there's something wrong.
There's some paperwork missing
Oh,
somewhere. That's
man.
like, right?
Doesn't sound right.
Maybe I'm like flagged or blacklisted or something. Like, don't
know.
call
You
her.
can just tell she's trouble.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know.
So anyways, eventually that whole process took a few weeks longer than we wanted to. And then we moved over to the other side after we fixed up that first side. And then that was where I would say like troubles began, I guess. We were brand new, and I think we read a whole bunch of books on like screening tenants and stuff, and we kind of had our criteria. But it was a 3-bedroom, 1 bath, and we had fixed it up, so we were a little bit higher rent-wise on the market. And I will admit, I did not have an abundance mindset at that point. I was very fearful, like, we'll never get this thing rented. We got to come up with the rent on this thing. It's already been 2 weeks longer than I wanted it to be, like that kind of thing. And so we had someone apply who didn't qualify, didn't have a job. He was unemployed.
Oh, I
And
remember that.
yeah, and if you remember during the tour, their kid was just
Oh my goodness, their kids were wild. I
Yeah.
remember those kids.
yeah,
Yeah,
just
they
kinda
were
nuts.
jumping off the walls and
Yeah, and they smoked.
yeah.
And I remember we were just like, they don't meet our criteria. But again, I was kind of fearful. And when I called him to tell him, sorry, you don't qualify, I let him talk me into letting him rent. He's like, don't worry, I'm going to find a job because I've got I've got an in-demand skill, so it's going to be fine. And we're not going to smoke in the house. We'll smoke outside, and like the kids are under control. And eventually, my wife's going to get a job too, and so it'll all be great. And it wasn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was miserable. I don't remember exactly how long that lasted, but it lasted a long time.
Yeah.
And eventually they started doing partial payments, and I was accepting those, and it was just like, man, I hated, like, every time I might see him, it was like, hey man, like, how's it going?
Yeah.
And they got over $3,000 behind on their rent doing these partial payments, and it was just trouble. And I remember eventually they got their tax return back, and they got enough money to catch up on the rent. And so they did. And this is one of those, like, I'm super grateful in retrospect that happened, because you and I learned a lot about what we don't accept
Right.
and what we're not going to put up with.
Yeah.
And so that was when I went to him and said, hey, this is awesome. I'm super happy. This whole interaction between you and me was not fun. I didn't like it. I don't think you liked it. I will not let it happen again. Therefore, I will no longer accept partial payments. Either you have the full rent or you don't. And he was like, oh, yeah, that totally makes sense. I didn't like it either. And I think it was like that next month, the 5th came, and I think it was like the 6th, he gave us 30-day notice to move out. I was like, all right, well, I mean, cool.
Yeah.
Figured out the game. And then we didn't get paid rent that month either. Yeah. I think at that point in time too, I finally settled into like, you know what, we have enough income. We can survive without a tenant. It's okay. And they moved out without a problem, which was nice.
They moved out without a problem.
Like within 30 days. We didn't have to evict them or anything like that.
The condition of the property was awful.
Yeah, I want to describe that a little bit.
Oh, I remember finding crayon everywhere.
Yeah.
Like the plugs, the outlets in the walls were colored on, like crayon stuffed in the colors, and all over the stove, the refrigerator, like the cutting board was all scratched up. It was, and filthy, just kind of dirty.
Yeah.
You know?
I think the thing that annoyed me the most is that outside to them equaled the garage for smoking.
Oh, yeah. It was.
And so it smelled
like
really
smoke.
bad. We ended up having to replace the carpet. We did a couple other projects while we were there. Like we had to repaint everything.
Yep.
It was a real pain. It was expensive.
It was expensive and a pain.
Yeah.
We learned, like you said, though, we learned a ton about the value of having criteria and being firm on them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if we would have learned that if we hadn't had someone who broke all the rules.
Yeah, I agree.
So it was valuable.
It made it so that we didn't get ourselves into massive trouble when we had 20 different tenants and we were just kind of just trading on getting lucky.
I think it also, like, there was this component to me during that phase as well that I remember thinking, like, how can we help people learn how to be able to afford a place? Because it just, there was this scenario like where their cat got sick and they made a choice. It was like, we can take the cat to the vet or we can pay our rent. And like, they took care of the cat. Yeah. And it was just like, okay, like there's so many layers to this that I'm just like, all right, how can we help, like, teach people how to increase income or how to balance budgets better or how to make those hard decisions when it comes down to it or how to, like, create a savings account. So it's like, here's how you can pay for your pet or here's how you can pay for your rent. Or like another example of that was like, they couldn't pay the rent or chose not to pay the rent, but had super expensive internet and phones and video games. And it was like, okay, like there's some priorities here that are out of balance. And so we learned as well this kind of compassion for people, but also a passion to be like, all right, how do you manage your finances well? And what does that look like? Yeah. And we have a vested interest if you're paying us rent. Yeah. But we actually care about you succeeding in life as well. So that was hugely valuable to me to see that and realize, like, we can help here in a different way.
Yeah. Eventually, 3 years passed. We bought another place. We moved out. That's a whole nother story. I want to share just some numbers because I like numbers.
You do
so
like
I'm gonna
numbers.
Share them. So again, we bought it for $180,000. During the time that we owned it, our net cash flow during it looks like it was 11 years was $11,000. So we averaged about $1,000 a year, so a little less than $100 a month. Now again, we lived in one side for 3 of those 11 years.
Sure.
So it's okay that it's a little low, I guess. Having said all that, our cash on cash return during that time was still 7.6%, which in Oregon, like you
good.
can't, it's very hard to get that these days. So
Yeah.
it was good from that standpoint. We eventually decided to sell the place, and that was because the market was doing what the market did. It went crazy. So we sold it for $354,000. And after you take into account just closing fees and all that other stuff. Oh, I should also say, when we bought it, we put $11,000 into the property.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that was our down payment.
Down payment.
Plus some of those initial repairs, which did get offset by the
refund.
By the refund piece of it. But yeah, so that was the other component why our cash flow wasn't huge. Is because we had a very small down payment.
Yeah.
Because we were highly
Getting
leveraged,
started.
and it was all good. And so we sold it for $345,000. When it was all said and done, our net money that we got out from it, which we did a 1031 into another property, was $205,000 for it. So bought it for $180,000, put $11,000 into it, got another a little less than $11,000 while we owned it, and then we got a nice big check for $205,000. And that was where I kind of went like, all right, cash flow is cool, but that was pretty cool too. and that was kind of got me onto the whole okay, what does it look like to buy properties that are distressed, need some help, fix it up, and maybe you don't hold on to it forever. And that was where I went down the path of okay, a fix and flip or a burr, or do something bigger because I have these data analysis skills and management skills, and that kind of was what put me into the syndication path. Yeah. And so that was kind of a catalyst, ultimately selling this place, to go oh, you know what, there's something to be said about those capital types of gains. And we did. We put it into a bigger property. The interesting part about it is that the returns are slightly lower, but because it's such a bigger property, the absolute dollars are bigger. Yeah. And which is nice. Another couple of ways to measure it. There is an average annual return, which essentially says you take how much money you put in and all that money that you got for the, from a cash flow and for selling standpoint. That was 144%.
Ooh.
It was huge.
That's a good number.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's a typical number, just to put it in perspective?
10 to 15, maybe 20. Yeah. No, it was. And the reason why that number is so huge is because we had the small down payment. Yeah. And so it made for not a lot of extra cash flow. It skyrocketed. Yeah. And the value of it rose so much, which honestly, you and I didn't have much to do with. That was just kind of the market. Yeah. Outside of, we did a bunch of things to fix it up and make it nicer and genuinely increase its value. Sure. And then my favorite measure is the internal rate of return, which takes into account the value of time. So it's saying $1 you get today is worth more than $1 you get 10 years from now. So that is only a 23% return. And part of that is because that $205,000 at the end, 11 years later, it was 11 years later. It came so late that it had a heavy discount on it. And but in IRR, anything over 15 is worthy of getting excited about. All right. And so this was 23%, so it was great. So overall, a fantastic investment. And I think even more than just the numbers piece of it, it was something where you and I, we learned a ton. Yeah. Both about what it means to be a landlord, how to manage, just seeing that entire cycle of a property go through.
I think on that property as well, both of us were injured at different points. And so we learned how to work safely and use appropriate tools.
Yeah. I remember it was a Thanksgiving. I had just turned 30 and it was over Thanksgiving. We were going to redo all the cabinets. Yeah. Because I think we were starting to get to that point where okay, we're going to start, we're going to move on. So we want to start getting our place nice. Yep. And it was Wednesday night. So it was the night before Thanksgiving, before this 4-day weekend. I was doing some work and I was using a tool that was semi-broken, but I was making it work, and it ended up biting me,
Yeah.
and I had to go get stitches. And so I sat on the couch all of Thanksgiving weekend, taking
stripped
medications,
cabinets.
used stripped cabinets. I grappled with the fact that I was no longer invincible,
Oh.
and that like I was actually immortal, and that was really hard. That was a hard moment for me.
Yeah.
But the cabinets looked really nice. I actually liked it. They were, for a while we kept them open, and it looks
Yeah,
more
that's
cluttered,
true.
but I did like that open feel as well. But yeah, no, we ultimately painted them, and they looked awesome.
Yeah.
It was all said and done. We got some awesome tenants in after we moved out, and yeah, overall it was great. So there you go. Anything else you want to add about this particular property or purchase?
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
Good place.
First
Good memories.
of many. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was good. And if you enjoyed this podcast, we would love it if you would either like it or leave a review on wherever you listen to this podcast. And so thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.